welcome into the Sportsmemo podcast alongside Robbie Veno. I am Drew Martin. We're going to be hitting on college football, every game on the board, starting off with UCF versus Connecticut and working our way down through the Thursday, Friday games, maybe even a couple Saturday games. We'll see if time permits, but nonetheless, we'll get Thursday's guest in to finish off the Saturday card along with Friday's guest as well. But college football week 1 is here. We have Rob Veno with us. Robbie, welcome in. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good, Drew. It's like we were talking off air. It's that time of year where I think we're all generally excited. You put in a lot of work over the summer into college football to try and keep up while the baseball's going on. You know, you get a little bit of time to go ahead and do some research and some, in my case, some power rating stuff. And then it gets here. So like I say, it is a big weekend, and we're all fired up. We're ready to go, man.
Absolutely. College football week 1 is here. We got Thursday, August 30th, 133, 134, 7 o'clock Eastern start. UCF at Connecticut on the Watch ESPN app. Looks like UCF's laying 23.5. 74 is the total at Bovada, as low as 71.5 at 5 dimes. Robbie, how you looking to bet UCF UConn?
Yeah, huge move on that total, Drew. One day, a couple of days ago, it just got banged up pretty good, and it's gone up since then. But, it's hard to argue with it, right? Josh Heupel, now the head coach at Central Florida, has promised to go even faster than what Scott Frost's UC Fast offense did last year. Josh Heupel, of course, we know from Mizzou how quickly they went as far as play calling is concerned on the offensive end. So you would expect it from them here in this game. They've got a host of returning offensive guys back, led by Mackenzie Milton, the starting quarterback. So you almost figure Central Florida to be in that same offensive output range as they were last year. When they played UConn last year, the game landed 49-24, 25-point win. But that was a little bit of a different Connecticut team. Randy Edsall, sometimes you go through your first year in a rebuild project and, that's the start of the rebuild. It almost seems like year 2 is the start of the rebuild for Connecticut, a team that was pretty much gouged defensively by graduation. They only returned 2 guys. Now, the defense was so bad last year, it could be a good thing that there's only 2 back. But there's 17 freshmen reportedly that are going to hit the field at some point in time in this game for Connecticut, part of their 2-deep rotation. And when you have a defense that's that young, that inexperienced, especially in the secondary, you just can't really see, in week 1 at least, a clear vision of UConn being able to slow down Central Florida whatsoever. Central Florida's defense is not without its own flaws, but I don't know that those flaws can be exposed by Connecticut. A team with a pretty good quarterback in David Pindle, but a running game that lost their top 2 guys during the offseason here. So there's a new offensive coordinator here in John Dunn, who brings a pro style kind of to Connecticut. Just for listeners out there who don't know exactly what he's going to feature, it's almost an anything goes type of offense that John Dunn's going to install here, whether it be design quarterback runs, whether it be RPOs, whether it be vertical passing game. There's up tempo to this. So, when you go up tempo as well, Drew, you put a little pressure on a defense that's as young and vulnerable as Connecticut's is. Central Florida certainly the team more experienced than going quick. Power ratings showed this game to be Central Florida minus 26. They're up to 23.5 right now. And as you said, the total has been blasted into the mid-70s. So we'll see. But I think a 25-point win last year probably indicates that Central Florida is capable of the same this year.
Yeah, Robbie, you touched on it. I mean, going UC fast, Heupel commenting they want to even go faster this year. So I kind of agree with this move with you. It will be interesting to watch this game. I don't have a bet on it, but really to see where UCF's at compared to last year. I do agree with you. I think the defense takes a step back. I'm not so sure the offense has to, though. I think Heupel has the kind of ingredients here with the quarterback, some talent all around there. Being UCF and the good recruiting on offense, I think that they can really have their offense back. I don't know too much about UConn, but do you look for UCF to really regress here, or you think they can kind of keep up to how they were last year?
I think, 13-0 is hard to keep up with, right? And the win over Auburn at the end of the year, I certainly don't think they could duplicate that win this year. But the recruiting down there, like you just mentioned, in Central Florida has gotten so good. The athletes that they put on the field right now have gotten to be so good that where the American Athletic Conference is concerned, Drew, I mean, we don't use the term reload with Central Florida like we do with Ohio State, Alabama, so on and so forth. But in their particular conference, you could almost use reload. They're to that stage in the group of 6 where, like Boise State, like San Diego State, like some others, every year that rolls around, they're going to now be under consideration for that New Year's Day 6 bowl game. And I think that, there's probably some teams on the schedule that can test them, especially with their defense. But, boy, they're going to be able to score. I mean, you saw how Heupel came in and took a dormant Missouri offense, and really lit it up the last couple of years. So it'll be interesting. He's got the quarterback to do it. I just think it's a tough time for UConn to get Central Florida in week 1. And it's probably a real good time for Central Florida, vice versa, to catch UConn here in week 1.
Conference game here, Robbie. Heading up to the Big Ten, we got 1-3-5, 1-3-6 Northwestern versus Purdue. Looks like Purdue opened 4 down to 1 now, -1, 1.5 at bookmaker, 51.5 the total, pretty much across the board. What do you like here for the Cats and the Boilermakers, Robbie?
Well, I think this line was held up all summer long, right? I remember these lines coming out in like late June at some places, and then they became universal in the month of July. But this line was really stagnant for a long time, dependent upon the health of Clayton Thorson, the quarterback for Northwestern. Now, all indications to me, Drew, and I know it hasn't been officially announced yet, at least not that I know of, but all indications to me from seeing some footage of Northwestern practice and whatnot, and some reports are that Thorson's very, very much ready to go, and he'll play in this game. Subsequently, we saw a move on Northwestern here. Game went from the opener of 3 down now to 1.5. So there's been some Northwestern money here. Very important game for both sides. I'll tell you what, for me, if I was going to play, I'd probably have to be on the Northwestern side because I'm kind of in the anti-Purdue boat this year, and I think that it's somewhat against the grain because I think people see the job that Jeff Brom did last year in West Lafayette and figure that's just going to get better second year around. But I think there's some questions to be answered here. First off, when you're Purdue, you don't catch anybody by surprise this season. Under Darrell Hazel, they were such a doormat that I think people probably took Brom's first year a little bit lightly, people meaning opponents, opposing sides. And subsequently, Purdue, it became a pretty good team. It's interesting, Drew, that when we listen to these head coaches talk, as much college football as we watch, you hear these press conferences, these head coaches, especially entering the season, 80% of what they say is meaningless coach speak. You find a handful or maybe a couple of handfuls of these college coaches who are honest in their opinions and what they tell the press. And last year, head coach Jeff Brom was telling anybody that would listen that his defense was better than people thought. And you sit there and you think, yeah, Purdue stinks. Their defense is no good. And Purdue went out last year and proved them right. They played exceptional on the defensive end. It was very unlike Jeff Brom coming from those high-flying Western Kentucky offenses to not be able to produce with the Purdue offense. That's the point I'm going to get to here because I think his honesty shows up again in one of his quotes. In August at Big Ten Media Days, he was telling, or late July, he was telling the press that his offense still has a lot of improvement to make in his system. They're not there yet. And before they can consistently move the football the way that his offenses did at Western Kentucky, he says they're going to have to find creative ways to move the football. Now, against the Northwestern defense that's as stacked as this one is, very, very talented defense, especially across the defensive front. When you're already saying that you have to find creative ways to move the football, That's a negative sign to me. He came out and said it again. He doesn't believe they're going to be able to run the football in this game. They're going to have to throw the football, probably more than he would like with this particular team, but they're going to have to try things. Can't necessarily drive the field against Northwestern, and they'll have to have some quick hits to score points. So for me, year two of this offense, personnel still not good enough for him to think that they're on their way at this point in time. I'd much rather have the Northwestern side here with Clayton Thorson and his ability to move his football team. Northwestern, not a team that blows a lot of people out, but certainly they get enough done offensively to go with that defense. Purdue lost a lot on their defensive side too, so I don't know that those numbers that they put up last year are going to exist this year. For those reasons, I think I would be on Northwestern. Power ratings made Northwestern a 1-point favorite in this game. We're kind of closing in on that, and it wouldn't surprise me with only 4 games on the board tomorrow, with the late rush of money that's going to come on a night where there's only 4 games, that Northwestern, this thing wouldn't spin around and Northwestern wouldn't become the favorite. I think a lot of that trailer money or people who are following line moves money probably gets to the Northwestern side tomorrow, and you'll probably see a reversal of favorites.
All right, Robbie, we got 137, 138, New Mexico State versus Minnesota. 45 the total. You can find a 44.5 at Bookmaker. And it looks like Minnesota laying 3 touchdowns pretty much across the board. This one on Big Ten Network. Doug Martin versus PJ Fleck. Aggies versus Golden Gophers. How you looking to bet it?
Yeah, I'm probably higher on PJ Fleck and the Minnesota Golden Gophers than a lot of people out there. You see mixed reviews on them and not much expected of them if you look at the season win over-under total. And I know that those are predicated on just going up and down the schedule and figuring out how many times they'll be favored, how many times they'll be dogs, and throwing up a number. There were some injuries here to this team, obviously. That backfield was going to be tremendous, but it's going to rely solely on Rodney Smith now because of the Shannon Brooks injury. Still, it's probably enough of a running game behind their offensive line. The quarterback situation with a brand new freshman quarterback, I think that people are leery of teams with freshman QBs taking over the helm, but it can't. The QB play, Drew, can't be any worse than it was for Minnesota last year. And then you look at their defense. I think their defense with 7 returnees is going to be much better than it was last year. And last year it was really good. But PJ Fleck, for me, second year of this quote-unquote row-the-boat system, I think that the kids have bought in. I think you'll see pretty good results out of them. You catch New Mexico State with only 3 days to get ready for this game, and a team that was absolutely annihilated at the line of scrimmage by Wyoming. I think the Wyoming and Minnesota defenses are comparable. So it's certainly you can make that connection. Let's not forget that Tyler Vanderwall, the quarterback for Wyoming, was playing in his first college game ever on Saturday night against New Mexico State. And instead of having him throw the football, they're really high on that kid. I mean, the comparisons that head coach Craig Bohl made of Vanderwall to Josh Allen are really large comparisons here. He didn't throw the ball all that much, didn't throw it all that well, but they ran for over 300 yards against that New Mexico State defense. That specialty of the defense is pass pressure, not necessarily run stopping. A Big Ten offensive line against these guys with only 3 days to get ready, I'd question it a little bit. Now, power ratings don't consider the situation. They're just raw numbers, talent versus talent. Had Minnesota at home minus 16. We're looking at 20.5 now. The question becomes, do you think there's 5 points worth of value, extra points of value in Minnesota, having New Mexico State travel on short practice time after what we saw of New Mexico State offensively? You and I talked about this last week, right? And I know, again, you watch a lot of Sun Belt football, but when you lose Rodgers at quarterback, when you lose Rose, and when you lose Jaleel Scott, those 3 guys, it's going to show up in your offensive output, and it certainly showed up against Wyoming. It's tough to sit there and lay 3 touchdowns with Minnesota and the true freshman quarterback, but then again, the freshman quarterback, and then again, Wyoming just did it, and they did it on New Mexico State's home field.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a one-way bet for me. It's Minnesota or pass. 139, 140. We got Wake versus Tulane. My favorite game of the night. This one on the CBS, either CBS or CBS Sports, not sure. Looks like this opened up close to 10. Now it's under a touchdown, Wake's laying. -6. You can find a 6.5 at 5 dimes. 55 the total. It's a tricky handicap here, Robbie, because, Tulane with Willie Fritz running the triple option, but it's also extra time to prepare for the Wake side, but Wake without their athletic quarterback. Tricky handicap. How are you looking to bet it?
Yeah, and that's the reason for the line move, right? As soon as the Kendall Hinton suspension came down, the money was automatically put on Tulane, which, it helps a little bit that Tulane's somewhat of a, I'm not going to call them a public team, but I'll say a little bit of a bandwagon team from the early bettors. I think a lot of guys expecting Tulane to be better this year, and rightfully so, because they should be better. It's the most talent Willie Fritz has had down there since he became head coach. But I want to talk just a quick second about the freshman quarterback, Sam Hartman, who's going to start here for Wake Forest. His high school coach, in an article I read, predicted that he would be on the field as a true freshman for Wake Forest. The list of attributes goes on and on. Just to quote his high school head coach, he's a passer, he's a leader, he's a coach on the field. His pre-snap reads, his movement keys, he's incredibly accurate. Just to call somebody a true freshman and dismiss him as a true freshman is not always the case. In my estimation, maybe about 80% of the time, first time out on the road, maybe these kids have jitters, but there's that 20% of these true freshmen, and we see them a little more recently, I think. No numbers to back them up, just from what my eyes see. I think more recently we see true freshmen take the field and be able to handle the pressure and be able to come through. This kid, Sam Hartman, according to head coach Dave Clawson, was in a quarterback race that was as good of a quarterback battle as he's ever coached. And he wound up winning it simply because Jamie Newman got hurt. So it winds up being Hartman. I don't know that the offense, obviously with Hinton it's better, Drew, but I don't know that it suffers as much as the movement in this line indicates, not just sidewise, but total-wise, too. It's been bet heavily toward the under here from 61 all the way down to 55. Could be some weather concerns. See about 50% chance of rain down there in New Orleans for this game. Possible, but maybe it doesn't rain at all. Wake Forest can lean on the ground game, certainly. And you take a look at what they've done offensively. And it's really remarkable, the fact that they ran almost 76 plays per game last year. This has become a high-tempo, very efficient offense. Get their number one receiver, Greg Dortch, back, who got hurt last year. I think there's a lot of positives. 5 offensive linemen returning for Wake Forest. Probably a lot of positives on the Wake Forest side offensively. Defensively, they're probably about the same as they were last year. They've never been great under Clawson. I don't know that they ever could be because of their inability to recruit like a Clemson or a Florida State. But I see good things offensively for Wake Forest. I see the same things for Tulane. I mean, obviously, you talked about the quarterback situation for Tulane, where they become very, very explosive, and they're not, as you know, Drew, they're not your basic methodical option-style offense that's trying to grind clock. They move at a pretty good pace, and they throw the ball a little bit more than most options teams do, and they'll throw the ball a little bit more this year, I read, because Willie Fritz is comfortable with his skill position players and with his offensive line. I'm not going to thoroughly disagree with people who have pushed this game down sidewise, but to tell you the truth, Wake Forest with Kendall Hinton, when I made the power ratings earlier this summer, showed up as a 10.5-point favorite on the road here. They opened 8. They've since been bet down, as you mentioned. If we shave some of that 10.5 down because of Hinton's absence from this game, I still don't know that it gets to be as low as the line is now. And I certainly don't know that the total should have been pounded 1 touchdown less than what it opened at. Looks like there's a little bit of value in that number to me.
Okay, good stuff on the Thursday card, Robbie. Guys, want to give a shout-out, tip my cap to Robbie. His college football 20 stars have been great, over 70 units in the last, I believe, 5 years. So tip of the cap to you, Robbie. Obviously, you know your stuff in as far as information goes with college football. And Major League Baseball, you're up double digits as well. How are you able to do all this, man?
Yeah, my wife wants to know where I am half the time. Where are you? I'm buried here in this office, like any of us are, right? I mean, we're all active during the day, whether it be through podcasts, whether it be through research or whatever. But it's what you have to do to try and put yourself in the best position to win. I was taught that a long time ago, Drew, early 90s. You're not going to win all the time. Just try to put yourself in the best position to win. It's what we attempt to do here every day for the clients and myself. So it's worked out pretty good, and we'll see if we can't get off to a real fast start in college football as well.
All right, for sure, Robbie. And before we get to the Friday card, did want to give like a special offer for the podcast listeners. If you email in to the office, call the office, or if you put the code into the website podcast, we will give you half off of Rob Veno's full season for college football. That would be only $4.99. You'd get his full season of plays, or you could get it for his NFL or college football and NFL, which is normally $12.99. We can give it to you for $649. That will take you all the way throughout the Super Bowl, all of Rob Veno's picks. So it's a good little deal here, and we'll run it until the close of business tomorrow. So just email in podcast and or call the office with the code podcast. All right, guys. Friday's card, 141, 142, Utah State versus Michigan State. 50.5 the total. Looks like Sparty laying 23.5 at home. Robbie, how you looking to bet this one?
Yeah, it's a couple of teams here, Drew, with a lot of guys back and a lot of expectations. Depending upon who you talk to, Michigan State could be, a person's third best team in the Big Ten. They could be their fourth best team in the Big Ten. Some people think they're the second best team in the Big Ten. But needless to say, there's a lot of talent coming back from a team that performed really well last year. The same goes for Utah State, not in the 2017 performance overall, but as far as the returnees to this team, and meaningful returnees. Again, I know Andrew and I used to talk about this a lot. You just can't open up a preseason annual and see 18 returning starters and assume, oh, that team's going to be so much better. It doesn't always work that way, but Utah's got meaningful guys. Utah State has meaningful guys back here, and I think it'll be a competitive game. Utah State, as a road underdog, 8-3 over the course of the last 9 years. I think they're generally not in that role very often inside of conference, but they don't mind traveling and playing games like this. We'll see how they do in their season opener against Michigan State. Like I say, a team that's just littered with expectations to do big things this year. You can't really disagree with it when you check their personnel and what head coach Mark D'Antonio was able to do last year. You'd have to agree. I'll tell you this. Power ratings made the game Michigan State minus 22. So certainly now at the price that they're at, it's fairly close. But there's one thing for me to note here is that Michigan State last year, despite as good a season as they had, we like to talk point spreads here rather than straight up numbers, unless we're talking season over win totals. From a point spread perspective, Michigan State was not asked to lay over 17.5 points one time last year. This is a full touchdown. At 23.5, it's 6 points better than the highest number they were asked to lay last season. So they're kind of in that stratosphere now, Drew, where they're going to lay really big numbers, even against a team that is as improved as Utah State is, at least on paper. So I wonder if they'll be able to handle week one this type of number. I don't know that they can. I think that money has showed that there's other people who have the same type of feeling in what could be somewhat of a defensive battle. I'll leave you with this. Utah State hired a new defensive coordinator this past offseason, Keith Patterson, who was the defensive coordinator for Arizona State. Anybody who's watched Arizona State football the last couple of years knows how aggressive Keith Patterson is. He came in, and head coach Matt Wells basically asked him, listen, don't change our system. We're going to run a 3-4, but we need you to tweak some stuff and get us better in the running and run defense. 115th last year in the nation against the run, giving up 217 yards per game. Over the course of spring and summer practice, he's got players running around saying the whole thing is fixed. The adjustments this guy made are phenomenal, and it's all fixed now, and we're going to be fantastic against the run. Can't believe it all, Drew, but I do think that there's a little bit of truth to it. And perhaps if Utah State doesn't get steamrolled by the Michigan State ground game, they hang in a good majority of the way here. 23.5 looks to be a little heavy price to me. Maybe a flyer here on Utah State to keep it closer than that.
Yeah, the big dog here. We got 143, 144 Syracuse, Western Michigan. Looks like Syracuse -5.5, -6, depending where you shop. 66 is the total at Bookmaker, as low as 64.5 at Bet Online. How are you looking to bet the Orange versus Western Michigan, Robbie?
Yeah, it's funny with Dino Babers, right? I mean, we've expected, and I think we're still expecting the offense to thoroughly break loose. With quarterback Eric Dungy this year, he's good enough to expect that one more time. But they haven't been able to put both sides of the ball together so far during his tenure. I would think that this year, being his third, you'd see a more complete Syracuse team. I feel that way at least. But I don't know, Drew, that this team with their personnel, when you take them on the road to Western Michigan against Western Michigan's personnel, I don't know that it's all that much better. I think it's a pretty competitive matchup here. And as much as I like Syracuse, they probably have to outscore Western Michigan because I don't think Syracuse defensively is going to be able to stop Western Michigan from scoring, and vice versa. It goes for both sides here. I agree with the movement on the total here. I think that this could be one of those typical track meets back and forth. You've got good quarterback play on both sides because Wasink for Western Michigan, very good as well. In a game where I haven't played yet, and I find it real hard to find a side play in this game. If I had to, I guess I would take the home underdog, Western Michigan here. But I do think the total is probably the right move. I think these two teams can eclipse 70, and right now you're sitting at 66, which basically isn't as key of a number as maybe 67 is. So you can probably get a little bit of value still here on the total.
Yeah, is WMU looking to run tempo this year, Robbie?
They are. And in this game, we know Syracuse will.
Yeah.
So you get those extra possessions. And like I say, in week one with a couple of veteran quarterbacks, you expect the offenses to move pretty good. We saw offenses move pretty good with backup quarterbacks, with new quarterbacks in that Hawaii-Colorado State game. So I don't know if these two defenses are as bad as those two were, but you get the idea.
All right, we got Western Kentucky versus Wisconsin, 145, 146, 52.5 the total. Looks like Whiskey laying 35.5 at home. I'll tell you, Robbie, Western Kentucky, what a mess last year. Bringing in the coordinator to the head coach, it was just like a deer in headlights. I feel like he kind of lost control, almost to the point where it makes me look to kind of fade that same sort of scenario going forward, where Stanford comes in, he's never been a head coach before, all the new responsibility. It would kind of happen with anything in life if you just kind of take too much on and no experience, and it just seemed like it kind of got away from him. But on the other side of the ball, are you looking to lay 36 with the Badgers? Possibly. Are you, Robbie?
Well, the thing about Wisconsin is the number looks huge, but Wisconsin's the type of defense that can hold you to 14 or less. And when you put it in that context, the question becomes, can you get to 49 points here against Western Kentucky? When you include what I think, it's hard to handicap for certain, Drew. In fact, it's impossible to handicap for certain. But I think in the case of this game, where you have an offense like Western Kentucky's that's going through such an adjustment period after Jeff Brom left. As you mentioned, Mike Sanford came in and it couldn't get it going with Mike White, the veteran quarterback here last year. So with only 3 returning starters, can he get it going this year against this Wisconsin D? The point being that you may be able to factor in a defensive score or two, maybe not something that goes all the way to the end zone, but something that puts Wisconsin in very short field positions to have easy scores. Their offense is going to be unbelievable this year, the best we've seen out of Wisconsin. And we saw Wisconsin really start to move the ball at the end of last year. Once Alex Hornibrook got into the flow throwing the football, and that game against Miami of Florida in the bowl game, I mean, he threw it tremendously. The wide receivers are there. The offensive line is there. Some call it the best offensive line in the nation. The running game with Taylor is there. They could get to 50 points in this particular game. Depends on how heavy Paul Chryst wants to go on scoring here. But at home in week 1, I think the team wants to perform well. It's real hard to back Western Kentucky at this point in time. We talked about Utah State being able, at least in my opinion, to go on the road and cover a monster number against Michigan State, who's as highly touted as almost anybody in the Big Ten. And now you have a lower level group of 6 FBS team in Western Kentucky doing the same thing, but the situation to me is just completely different. I don't know that Western Kentucky has it together yet, especially on the offensive end. So, it's probably Wisconsin or nothing. I saw where there was a $130,000 parlay bet on Wisconsin and Ohio State, right? 34 and 38 point favorites, I think. So somebody seems to think that those two teams are going to run away and hide. I don't know that I'll play it, but I think you could legitimately play over in this game because Wisconsin's going to come, pretty close to getting up and over themselves. So the total might be a little bit low here and open for a chance to cash in on an over.
All right, good stuff, Robbie. Moving on to the Rocky Mountain Showdown, we got 147, 148, Colorado State, Colorado from Mile High Stadium in Denver. A lot of elevation, likely a lot of high people. 65.5 the total, -7.5. Colorado's laying here. What do you got for this game, Robbie?
Yeah, when your fans are elevated as well, Drew, like you say, that's a pretty ruckus environment. I happen to like Colorado quite a bit this season heading in. So I'm all pro Colorado. And after what I saw out of Colorado State on Saturday, I think you have to be anti-Colorado State. But there's a couple of things before I get too crazy here with general blanket statements, which I don't like to do because I believe everything in the sports that we cover are all situational. But let's just look real quick at what happened to Colorado State. When I handicapped that game on Saturday, they had to go through a complete overhaul of their defensive system. John Jancic, the new defensive coordinator, comes in. It's a defense that was rotten to the core last year, and he's got to come in and overhaul and improvement. So Colorado State had to learn that brand new defensive playbook and try and perfect it over the summer. Now, that's bad enough. But in week 1, when you have to go out and face a run-and-shoot offense, which in college football is as obsolete as the option offenses are, triple option offenses are, that becomes a double whammy against that Colorado State defense. And they looked as if they had no clue where Hawaii was going with the football on Saturday night. Some of those receivers were so wide open, and you see Colorado's secondary members talking to each other with their shoulders shrugged and whatnot, nobody understanding where to be. So I think that was difficult. Colorado won't present the offensive challenge from a schematic point of view that Hawaii did. But boy, personnel-wise, it's a much better offensive team than what Hawaii is. Steven Montez at quarterback. You got to like him if he can stay healthy. He has shown with his legs, with his arm, he can make plays. They've got speed on the outside. They've got a good running game. Their defense is light years ahead of where Colorado State's is. I thoroughly agree with this line move from 6 to 7.5. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets a little bit higher when we get to game time. Certainly Colorado State, another one of those teams that's on a short work week, have to play Friday after playing Saturday night, time to regroup. There used to be an old theory, Drew, that one game under your belt would help you out, but I don't know that one game under the belt helps Colorado State in this instance. I think they're walking away a little more head-scratching than they are confident into this contest. The quarterback play, although it got better in the second half with KJ Carter-Samuels, I saw his first half just didn't look good. He's going to be under way more pressure here in this game than he was against Hawaii, so I think Colorado probably the right side here.
Yeah, Robbie, one thing I did notice in the Hawaii game is they were able to, at halftime, the defense especially, kind of regroup, and it was almost like they were, on the heels of their feet as far as in the first half, not really knowing what to look for. You kind of touched on it, where the ball was going to go. In the second half, they got a little bit better defensively. The quarterback looked a little better. So, I don't know, this 7.5, I'm always skeptical to kind of just lay it with the Power 5 team over a G5 team like this. Tricky handicap, though. You touched on it with second game for CSU and first game for Colorado. So on to 149-150, we got SDSU versus Stanford, 48.5 the total, 13.5 or 14 you're going to have to lay with Stanford. Aztecs versus the Cardinal, two similar type programs. San Diego State, with what they've been able to do with their program, both basketball and football, it's kind of coming along here as probably one of, if not, maybe outside of UCF or a school like that, one of the best programs in the G5 conferences. Stanford, obviously, they lose a lot, but They've recruited pretty well. National program. They can go into Texas, can go into Florida, get kids. So it will be interesting to see how they do this year. Robbie, are you looking to lay 2 touchdowns with Stanford?
Probably not, but I will say this. I think that Stanford, from an offensive standpoint, is going to be, in that we just talked about it with Wisconsin, right? Very seldom. Stanford and Wisconsin are kind of the same program. Just generally speaking, run the football, have a good offensive line, play tremendous defense, and grind away at your opponent and wind up winning a game. You can't see that in Stanford this year. I think defensively they're down a little bit, but offensively we saw at the end of the year. This team to me could end up averaging near 40 points per game when you give them the quarterback play, which finally got straightened out, right? Keller Christ was an absolute disaster for this team at quarterback, but they got the quarterback situation straightened out. Bryce Love, everybody knows about. I don't have to talk about him. Not going out on a limb, saying that he's going to be a Heisman Trophy candidate barring injury. And it's the receiving corps and the size of those receivers on the outside and that tight end when you're going 6'3", 6'3", 6'5", 6'6", all with skilled guys. And we started to see that at the end of the year where they would throw the ball up and these guys were making plays downfield, no less. I mean, this was not a short to intermediate passing game. These guys make plays downfield. I don't know how you stop Stanford at that point because everybody gangs up on the run. Rocky Long's 3-3-5 defense has been as successful against this team as any has. But Stanford's begun to see that defense a little bit more and more. And you throw into the equation that from an offensive standpoint, Stanford's coaching staff has said that they'll push it downfield a little bit more this year because they have a lot of assets in the vertical passing game. Like I say, I think you could see them averaging near 40 points. I'm all about playing Stanford up and over the total this year as many times situationally as I see fit, simply because they're one of those teams that gets pigeonholed into a certain type of team where the totals are generally mid-40s to mid-50s and nothing more than that. Here we see a huge move toward the under, open 53, down to 49. I think that once again Stanford is pigeonholed, and especially when you're playing San Diego State, who won't change their offensive system. They are what they are, a huddle-type team that takes some time off the clock and wants to run the football. I just don't know that they can stop Stanford the way they've been able to defend them in recent years. I think Stanford can score on anybody. To me, 49 is a bit low, Drew. I think you could find, without really going out on a limb, I think you could find something in like the 37 to 17 variety, 37 to 20 variety in this game, which is well above the 49 that you're asked to cash a ticket with the over.
All right, Robbie, we've got 159-160 Army versus Duke. This one on the Watch ESPN app, 45.5 the total. Looks like Duke laying 13.5. Getting bought up here a little bit against an Army school that loses their quarterback. This is an interesting handicap as well. You got Cutcliffe and extra time to prepare for the triple option. You think that goes into account? And is it worth almost laying 2 touchdowns with the Dukies?
Yeah, last year they they lose to Army 21-16. So if you take that, a game where the Duke Blue Devils were 3-point favorites in that contest, and now they're 13. That's a 16-point turnaround. Obviously, the home field is different, but a pretty big move towards Duke considering that Army beat them with only 2 weeks left in the season last year. You talk about losing Bradshaw. That's huge for Army. However, they seem to be real confident that the new quarterback here, Hopkins, can do the job. It seems like these option teams always have one guy waiting that can come in and do what his predecessor did. It just matters if they can throw it as well. Army doesn't look to throw it more than 3-4 times a game, but when you have those open passes, you got to complete them. I'll say this about Duke, Drew. I'm hesitant to play them. In an ACC preview earlier this summer with Andrew, I actually looked at them as a team to fade for one simple reason. Now, it's hard because David Cutcliffe will tell you this is the most athletic team he's ever had at Duke, and they expect big things down there. However, in the same breath, David Cutcliffe told us all that coming out of spring practice, their offensive line, which was a total disaster last year, isn't a total disaster this year, but remained a disaster heading into summer. The passing game was non-existent last year. Daniel Jones, a kid they call the Truth, who was very highly touted, who showed some flashes when he first hit the field a couple of years ago, couldn't consistently complete passes last year, whether it was his fault, whether it was the offensive line's fault because he was being chased all over creation, whether it be the receiver's fault because they were dropping passes. It was a whole combination of things that really weren't straightened out heading into August. Now, as August started, this team was praising, this coaching staff was praising the play of the wide receivers. All of a sudden, they were catching the ball. I need to see it on Saturdays before I get too caught up in Duke. Again, like Northwestern, which we talked about earlier, this is a school that has some NFL talent on their defense, and Duke is I won't say they're not obviously not as good as Clemson, so they're not as good as any defense in the ACC, but they're in that upper tier defensively as far as ACC play is concerned. So the total here to me is more of a correct move. Goes from 48 down to 45.5. I think you've got a Duke team that struggled offensively. We'll see how they are when they hit the field, but a defense that certainly could shut Army down here. And last year's 21-16 score, kind of an indication of where I think this one could be headed in that 37-point range, not necessarily that final. But I think under 45.5, people probably got it right here when they took it early, took it down to from 48 to where it is now.
Robbie, do you mind touching on that Duke quarterback situation again? Do you see him improving this year? I mean, I would think Cutcliffe in the offseason, this could be something to maybe kind of buy low on Duke, no?
Yeah, and it could be, Drew. It could be, although I'll say this. The number that's put out there indicates everything to me, and I don't know that you're buying low as a 14-point favorite or 13.5-point favorite. It's so dependent. The Jones kid is really talented. Nobody questions that, but it's the surrounding parts that even their head coach was questioning heading into the summer, whether or not that offensive line can protect. And if it can't protect, can it open up holes for the running game enough to give him some time? And then can the receivers catch the ball? They've got some new kids out there at receiver this year just trying to find the right combination. I mean, they're rattling through 9, 10, 11 receivers trying to figure out who's going to go on the field and catch the ball and make some plays. They think they found something. The difference between thinking you found it and truly having found it, they'll have to show me, so I won't play Duke here. But if they come out and win by, let's say they come out and win 31-7 and look pretty good offensively, then you'll know where to go with Duke the remainder of the season. Right now, I just have to see the offensive line and the receivers do something to, as far as improvement is concerned, to get me on Duke, because they should have been much better last year offensively, tell you the truth, Drew, and they just weren't.
Okay, good stuff, Robbie. And before we move on to the Saturday card, got a couple games here. Do you want to remind you guys the code PODCAST if you email in to main, MAIN, at sportsmemo.com, or call the office, 1-800-575-3069. With the code PODCAST, you can get Robbie's college football or college football and NFL for half off. Guy obviously knows his stuff. Robbie, on to the Saturday card, 151-152, FAU, Oklahoma. An interesting one here. Conference USA versus Big 12. Obviously, Heisman Trophy winner no longer there. Lane Kiffin, the Lane train, coming into Norman. 72 the total. Some opinion here, though. 72, 71s, depending where you shop. 20.5 to 21 across the board. The Sooners are laying against the FAU Owls. Robbie, how you looking to bet Owls Sooners?
Yeah, Lane Kiffin's got a chance here, I think. To pull the upset obviously would be miraculous, but the gap between what Lane Kiffin's been able to do in 1 year in Conference USA and the rest of Conference USA is widening. It's almost like, if he sticks around another year or two, it's almost like Florida Atlantic, much like Boise State. He could lay claim to a position in a power conference rather than being in the group of six conference that they're in right now. But they take all these transfers, Drew, that are really talented kids from other places where it didn't work, and somehow he meshes it all together. Last year, the way they came on offensively and just became unstoppable. We'll see. Oklahoma was not the best defense in the world last year. They're improved this year if you just go by personnel and expectations. But the offense, let's see it. Baker Mayfield to Kyler Murray, that switch now, will it be as effective? I'm not so sure. Baker Mayfield is accurate a quarterback as you can find, and he's proving that in the NFL in the preseason here. He's played pretty well for the Cleveland Browns. Is Kyler Murray that same guy? I don't think he is. He's more capable of quarterback run stuff and getting out of trouble and extending plays a little longer than Mayfield could. All the faith in the world. It's a tough game for me because Lincoln Riley may be my favorite head coach. From Texas Tech as offensive coordinator under Leach all the way to Ruffin McNeil at East Carolina when he was OC, and now here to Oklahoma. The guy's one of those young, very, very bright minds offensively. They probably don't stumble too much, but I just think that Kiffin at this point in time can find ways to put up points against just about anybody, thus the move in the total up to 72. Before I play this game, I have to really see what Oklahoma can do on defense. And like I said earlier, I don't know that offensively they're going to be the same team right out of the chute as they were when we last saw them shredding Georgia for 48 points in that overtime loss during bowl season. I'd probably look at Florida Atlantic plus 21 here, to tell you the truth. I think that Kiffin has a little something going on there, and he won't have his team. His team won't enter that building in awe of Oklahoma or the crowd or any of that. So maybe plus 21 here. Haven't played it. Don't know that I will, but perhaps the dog plus the big points is worth it.
All right, we'll head to Houston, 153-154. 12 o'clock start on Saturday. Houston versus Rice. Houston laying 25, 55.5 the total. Robbie, Rice, it's a mess, man. It was a mess week 0. It was a mess last year. Can they rebound here?
When you celebrate a last-second field goal to beat Prairie View A&M, it's not going to get any better. I mean, that celebration Rice had after that field goal went through to win the game was as if they had just won the FBS championship. Just amazing. But I know they're excited, and Mike Bloomgren took on a tough job. He came over from Stanford, and he's trying to recreate Stanford at Rice, kind of the same blueprint, right? You can only get, if you're Rice, you only get certain kids because of the academic restrictions. He wants to have a power running game. He wants to have good trench play, but he just doesn't have the personnel to do it right now. It's going to take Bloomgren, and I know he's got a lot of leeway from every report that I've read. He's probably got 4 years to try and get this going, 4 full recruiting classes to try and get it going. So judge him down the road. Don't judge him now. They're going through so many growing pains. They just don't have the athletes or the depth or the size or the speed, any of it, to compete with Houston. Much has been made this week as we hear about Heisman talk heading into the season of Ed Oliver, the defensive tackle for Houston, who's had a terrific career with Houston, and some project him to be the number 1 pick overall. He'll probably live in the Rice backfield here. I think Major Applewhite's second year will bring improvement to Houston. This game went from 21 all the way to 25.5. There's no way you could disagree with it. I mean, anybody who's going to play Rice is just banking on the fact that maybe Houston turns it over a few times and Rice gets a few cheap points. I don't know that they will. Their running game won't go anywhere against the Houston defense. So, like you said before about Minnesota, it's a one-way play. Even with the line in the 20s, this is a one-way play. Houston probably wins this game somewhere like 45-7, 45-6.
All right, Robbie, we got Pac-12 versus Big Ten, Oregon State versus Ohio State. 64 the total. Ohio State laying 38.5 or 39. This one, all kinds of political talk around this, what's happening with Urban Meyer. Do you think that leaks into the locker room? And on the other side of it, I mean, Oregon State, obviously not a great team last year, but it's tough for them to get any worse. I don't know, can they? And which way would you look to bet this one, Robbie?
Yeah, well, they're another one of those teams that's going through a complete overhaul, right? You bring in Jonathan Smith to be the head coach, and he's got a certain way that he wants to run things. He's going to bring the Chris Peterson way from Washington down to Oregon State, which is a good philosophy and a good direction to point this team. I think Oregon State had gotten lost the last couple of seasons, so all of that is good. The hires, offensive coordinator-wise, with Brian Lindgren, who really opened up that Colorado offense. Now he's here. It's just a matter of how quick can they mold these guys. They've got a lot of kids back this year. I don't know that the quarterback play will be – in fact, I think it'll probably be better under Smith. He's good with quarterbacks. So there's some – while it's a complete overhaul and a complete rebuild, there's some positives to Oregon State. That being said, this Urban Meyer situation, for what we do and for our purposes, all of that politics stuff is shoved aside. We really could care less about these debates that go on with people on their moral high horse judging other people. That's meaningless. What's meaningful when you're handicapping this game is Urban Meyer's allowed to control practices with Ohio State. So, Sunday through Friday, he's still the boss. He's just not on the sidelines on Saturday. And the coaching staff that he's put together there, the two coordinators, Kevin Wilson and Greg Schiano, who both have head coaching experience. Ryan Day is the interim, but certainly he's got good advice in both ears. I don't know that Ohio State, with the talent they have, is affected whatsoever by this Urban Meyer deal. Maybe when we get to TCU 2 weeks from now, maybe there's a slight effect. But I tell you what, I did not in my power ratings move Ohio State down even a half a point once Urban Meyer got suspended for these 3 games. They've been able to overcome graduation losses on either side of the football where you thought they were decimated. I forget if it was last year or the year before, where they only returned 2 starters to the defense, and they were just as good that year. So these 5 stars who just fill in where others leave, it's the same case here. We'll see if Haskins can be the same quarterback as J.T. Barrett. He's probably a little bit more athletic, to tell you the truth. I don't see any reason why Ohio State would slip at all without Urban Meyer. The fact of laying 38 points, I think it's probably better to play Oregon State right now where they're going through severe growing pains. Maybe 8-9 weeks from now, Oregon State will be worth taking a lot of points in certain situations. I don't know that I could do it here. I don't know that I could lay them either, though, Drew, because in all honesty, you could get up to 52-14. You still don't cover. So it's probably a no play for me. I see they've bet the total upward to 64 now. So a good field goal plus movement on the over. Maybe that's a way to go. I'm not sure of that either. So probably a game I'll leave alone, but I wouldn't downgrade Ohio State for any reason right now.
All right, 157, 158, App State versus Penn State. Looks like Penn State, the Nittany Lions laying 23.5 or 24, depending where you shop. 54 the total. How you looking to bet this Sun Belt Big Ten matchup, Robbie?
The biggest question for me, Drew, and we know Appalachian State's been able to go on the road. They pulled off a miracle upset at Michigan so many years ago. We still see it, still know about it. But the biggest question for me is on the defensive side, where Appalachian State has really made people money over the course of the last few years. They lose their defensive coordinator, Nate Woody, who went to Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's defense should be improved because of that. Whether or not Appalachian State is the same defense, kind of a question mark to me. All that being said, can Trace McSorley do the same things with all the losses that team suffered on the offensive side of the football? I mean, and not only Saquon Barkley, but in the receiving core, the tight end Gesicki, they lost a ton. And they lost their offensive coordinator, Joe Moorhead, down to Mississippi State. So I know James Franklin's a good coach. I just don't know that Penn State's going to be the same offensive team. They'll be better defensively. This total's moved from 57 down to 54. Don't like the game either way because I have to take a wait-and-see approach with both of these. Like I say, Appalachian from a defensive standpoint, Penn State from an offensive standpoint. A lot of times in week one, it's better off to sit back and get a little bit of knowledge on how some of these units are going to react where coordinator switches are concerned, where personnel losses are concerned, than it is to just go out and fire because the game's on TV or something. I think I'll leave that one alone. But for me, I'd like to see how Penn State's offense responds behind McSorley, and I'd like to see how Appalachian State responds defensively without Woody.
All right, Robbie, great stuff. Bunch of games here. Follow him on Twitter at Rob Veno Sports. I'm Drew Martin. You can follow me on Twitter at Drew Martin Bets. Robbie's college football, $9.99. You can get it for half off by emailing in, calling in, using the code podcast. And we got $9 Wednesday today. He's up double digits in MLB. Got to play there on the diamond. And we will be back tomorrow as well, finishing up the Every Game on the Board podcast for college football. For Rob Veno, I'm Drew Martin. We'll talk to you tomorrow.